I must be where God wants me to be. And I will be content to serve him wherever. And that's so important because we're always looking for greener grass. We're always thinking that over there it would be better. If I could just get there. And Irma Bombeck years ago used to say the only reason that the grass is greener on the other side of the fence is because the grass is over a septic tank or a septic field. So, okay. Chapter 41, verses 37 through 45. Renee?
The plan seemed good to Pharaoh. 37, you said, right?
Yep.
Okay. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find someone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" When Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took a signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in his robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and the men shouted before him, "Make way!" Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. When Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but without your word no one will lift a hand or a foot in all of Egypt." Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath-Paneah and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, to be his wife, and Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt.
Yes, excuse me, I jumped ahead there. So let's go back and Nicholas, will you read verses 25 through 32?
Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "Pharaoh's dreams mean the same thing. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams mean the same thing. The 7 thin, sickly cows that came out after them are 7 years, and the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east winds are 7 years of famine. It is just as I told Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt. After them, 7 years of famine will take place, and all the abundance in the land of Egypt will be forgotten. The famine will devastate the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered because of the famine that follows it. For the famine will be very severe. Since the dream was given twice to Pharaoh, it means that the matter has been determined by God, and he will carry it out soon. How far?
That's it, right there. And then, Chuck, you good enough to read? Yeah. Okay, 33 through 36.
Now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let him exact 1/5 of the produce of the land in Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food for these good years, that the coming and store up for the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food become as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land will not perish during the famine.
There are critics, of course, everywhere, but some major critics, one of the things that they pounce on when it comes to the story of Joseph and how it could not actually be true is, the first criticism they say is, how could this boy be in Egypt so long and not tell his dad he's still alive? How would you answer that criticism? How could he be in Egypt all these years and not tell his dad he's still alive?
How is he gonna get
No telephone.
How's he going to get word? All of his roommates are prisoners. And yeah, the Postal Service was horrible back then. I mean, it took forever to get a letter. And then the second thing they criticize is that he can't get his story straight. When Moses is supposedly writing this, for instance, in verse 33, he says to Pharaoh, do what? A man. In verse 34, he tells Pharaoh to do what? Which is it? Yeah. Is it one person or many people?
Or C, all of the above.
There you go.
You need one person and some managers under him.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense, but
By the way, wasn't that what God told Moses to do?
yes, instead of wearing himself out.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So, then we come to what Renee read in 37. And Pharaoh's listening to all this, and he thinks, what?
I think you would be a great discerning and wise man.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I can't think of anybody better suited than you, because you're the one thought of it. And so, Pharaoh, of course, had a Rolls Royce of a chariot. And Joseph, he had a Beamer. Nice, but not quite the level that Pharaoh had. Because he wanted to make a distinction. You know, they don't want Pharaoh driving out around, Egypt and people mistake Joseph for him. So they had two different kinds of chariots. And he tells him that he's going to have some amazing power. In fact, in verse 44, how much power does Joseph have?
Over everything.
Over everything. In fact, when it comes to the inhabitants of Egypt, what kind of power does Joseph have?
second in command of everything?
He is the person in command.
Yes, and how did they phrase that in verse 44? Without your permission?
No one shall raise his hand or foot.
Yeah, you can't walk, and you can't ask a question unless Joseph says so. That's power. Chuck?
And he gave him his signet ring. I mean, Pharaoh can't even stamp a document anymore. It's your job.
It's your job. And then we come up with the next criticism, and it happens in verse 45. What did Pharaoh do that Joseph should never have agreed to? That was my second one, but that's good. Gave him a wife. And what's wrong with giving him a wife?
She was an Egyptian wife. She didn't have, she had gods, and she was the daughter of a priest.
And
Was it Potiphar's wife's daughter?
no,
Threw him in prison to begin with?
nope, it was Potiphera. Potiphera. And she was the daughter of the priest of On, and On was a city where the main god Ra was located. So she was kind of a big wig. And
Did
his name to an Egyptian name?
Yeah, and they changed his name to an Egyptian name. And the critics say, you know, if Joseph was really a follower of God, he wouldn't have done either one of those. And what would you say?
Pharaoh gave him a huge honor. He gave him a wife who's from the top, the cream of the crop. He gave him an Egyptian name, which I'm sure is to be revered in the Egyptian community. If he's going to be a leader among the Egyptians, some of this goes with the title.
Yeah. Yeah. And if he was, and if he was to say, thanks, but no thanks, okay, back to prison. Exactly. And knowing Joseph, now he's going to slide a little bit, and we're going to see that in a minute. He's going to slide a little bit, but it wouldn't surprise me. He's so open about his faith that I'm sure him and Asenath had lots of discussions about her dad's God and his God. And questions. You know, do you mind if I call you Nettie? You know, Nettie, if your dad's God is so powerful, how come he couldn't interpret Pharaoh's dreams? I don't want to talk about it. Just eat your supper. Because that's, you know, how discussions go in families when we're not, you know, on the same page. We just change the subject and leave. So now the Jews are super good at writing fascinating, fanatical commentary. I mean, they can come up with the wildest stories. It was the Jews earlier in Genesis that came up with the story when it says the sons of God married the daughters of men, that demons married earth girls and had super babies. It was the Jews that come up with that. Well, here, remember when the boys were all in Shechem and Dinah got raped? The Jews' story is Dinah got raped and she got pregnant. And when she delivered the baby, they took it to one of the Egyptian temples and put the baby on the front doorstep. And it just so happened that it was in a town called On. And Potiphar found the baby, raised it as his own, and named her Asenath. So you see, it wasn't really an Egyptian. Joseph married a part Hebrew girl. Wow. What difference does it make? I mean, that's not the point of this story, how it came about. The point of the story is Joseph has been honored. Now, Joe, you ready? Genesis 41, verses 46 through 49.
41 through
46 through 49.
Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of the Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea, so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Esna, daughter of Pathariah, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It is because God had made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." The second son he named Ephraim and said, "It is because God was made me fruitful in the land of my suffering."
Okay. The plan's working. This famine, and it is so severe because Egypt never worried about famine. Egypt averaged about an inch of rain a year. But the waters of the Nile irrigated the land where they grew all of their crops, so they never worried about famine. And God, through Joseph, is telling Pharaoh, look, even the Nile is not going to supply enough water. This is going to be a bad, bad time. So they put all of this grain, they store it away, and as Joe read it, they had so much, they stopped keeping track. I'll just throw it over there in bin number 50. We got so much, we can't keep track of it. And so then, during the famine, Joseph and his wife have a baby boy. They name him Manasseh, which is a Hebrew name, but when Joseph is giving the explanation, the word for God, he doesn't say Jehovah. He says Elohim, which is a generalized word for God. And that's significant because all the other times when he's talked about God, he's used Jehovah. And now he's not. And then the second thing for Ephraim, he just uses a generic name for God. Okay. Robin, 53 through 57.
When the 7 years of plenty which had been in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said, then there was famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph, whatever he says to you, you shall do." When the famine was spread over all the face of the earth, then Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. The people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all the earth.
So Bruce, was all the grain given to Pharaoh as like a tax that he was making on the people of Egypt and the land, and then they were selling it during the famine back to the people and to the world? Or how did that work exactly?
I don't know for sure, but they were stockpiling in whether they, knowing government, they probably got the grain through tax.
That would be my guess.
Yeah, and then they sold it, making money hand over fist.
Got so much for the tax, right?
Well, yeah.
And he said, I'm done, you don't have to pay tax anymore.
I mean, like some politicians say, don't ever let a crisis, go unused. If you can use it to make a buck, go ahead and do it. And so they're making lots of money. But, yes.
What I noticed was now, because I read it and repeated it a lot, this says in that small section, there was a famine throughout the lands 4 times. So if that doesn't tell you how bad it was, that the Bible repeated it 4 times.
Yeah. Yeah, it was gigantic. In fact, it reached all the way to where Jacob was living, hundreds of miles away. And now we see, through 41, now we see why God had Joseph put in prison under Pharaoh's bodyguard. Joseph was a Hebrew, which meant he didn't speak Egyptian. You would need to speak Egyptian to work for Pharaoh. Immersed in the language, because he's in prison with other Egyptians, and if he wants anything at all, but even before that, when he's working for Potiphar outside, above ground where the sun shone, he had to learn, because he was doing buying and selling. He was trading. He needed to speak the language. He also needed to learn how politics worked in Egypt. And Potiphar was great at politics. I mean, he could take a screaming wife and placate her by just putting him in the basement. He was good. He was smooth. He could operate. And Joseph learned from there. Sometimes we get put into positions and things happen to us and we shake our heads and maybe we even cry and we think to ourselves, why, oh why, oh why? God is preparing us for that which we've been called to. And there's no other way to learn it except by going through it. So now we see God had been training him in the home of Potiphar. And that was quite a bit of training. Chuck?
I see another dimension in here. Take you to verse 56. When the famine was spread over all the face of the earth, then Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to who?
The Egyptians.
The Egyptians. Now, everything you've told us about the Egyptians are for the Egyptians. Notice who gets the grain. Let's go on. And the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. The people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe in all the earth. First thing he does is he gives to the Egyptians, which I'm sure is what Pharaoh would have done with that resource. But I don't see Pharaoh being the type who would have taken it to the rest of the world. We'll keep it here and make sure we're secure. Joseph, however, was working God's plan.
Yes. And the best argument that Joseph could have made to Pharaoh about opening the storehouses to other people would have been what?
The money.
Oh, the money.
Always follow the cash.
I know it's all about us, Pharaoh, but I tell you, we have the opportunity to make a boatload of money.
But God's saving the world, not just Egypt.
Yes, yes. And so sometimes God uses filthy lucre to save lives. He uses us in all of our weaknesses and failings to do what he does best. There's a group out there that says the reason that Pharaoh was so anxious and so willing to bring Joseph to this point was because he wasn't actually an Egyptian. He was part of the Hyksos movement. The problem with that historically is that the Hyksos kings did not come in to Egypt until after Joseph was gone. So that doesn't hold true. And what does it say here? Where did I read that? Joseph was how old when he came? He was 30. Do we know anybody else that had a monumental change in life when he was 30? Jesus. Yeah. Joseph, Jesus. 30. Out to save the world. Out to save the world. Okay. All right. Now, here we've got, just like in a television show, you've got the main characters and the plot going on, and then they always have a secondary thing going on. So we're back to the secondary. These are the Smothers brothers right here. They're just dumb and dumber. So, chapter 42, Kim, would you read verses 1 through 7?
Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, and Jacob said to his sons, "Why are you staring at one another?" He said, "Behold, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us from that place, so that we may live and not die." Then 10 brothers of Joseph went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, "I am afraid that harm may befall him." So the sons of Israel came to buy grain among those who were coming for the famine was in the land of Canaan also. Now Joseph was the ruler over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people in the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he disguised himself to them and spoke to them harshly. And he said to them, "Where have you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food."
Okay. Growing up with brothers that hated you. Hearing them talk about killing you. Then they throw you into a pit where you're screaming for your life. Then they haul you up and they sell you into slavery. Pretty rough, huh? I mean, that would be hard to take. Sold to Potiphar when things are just, kind of going, though he's still not in his hometown. Then he gets thrown in prison. And he's there for all of these years, 13 years. The suffering and the injustice of Joseph, probably you're thinking the greatest test of a person's life to stay with God. This is the greatest test in Joseph's life. Because while he's administrating, it just so happens, don't you like the way I say that? It just so happens, not with God. God put this on this day. He's there, and lo and behold, who shows up? His brothers. I don't know if he ever thought he would see them again. They're positive they will never see him again because they thought what? They thought he was dead. I mean, they knew that they didn't kill him, but how could you last that long as a slave? And there they are. And in verse 6, when they come before him, what do? They bow down. Whammo, the old dream pops back up. I don't know if he'd ever thought about that dream again. But right there, remember? He had the dream. Those boys were bowing down before him. Boy, this is my chance to get revenge. I'm going to make these guys squirm. No. He doesn't do that at all. That's what normal people do, not Joseph. Well, yeah, maybe. But there was some things that he was after. And notice at the beginning of chapter 42, what hasn't changed back in Mayberry? What hasn't changed since Joseph was there? What's still going on back in Mayberry?
They're still just.
they're just looking around. What do we do? Man, we're hungry. What time's dinner? And Jacob says, why are you guys... I gave birth to 11 idiots. That's what I did. Can't you guys like put a sentence together or a thought together, or there's grain in Egypt? And then notice, if you counted Joseph, how many boys did Jacob have? 12. Joseph's gone, so my Vesterberg math says 11. Am I right? But it says here, in verse, the 10 brothers. What? Why didn't he send Benji?
He's still playing favorites.
Yes. All of these years later, and he still got one favorite.
And you think the 10 didn't notice?
Joseph gone, Benjamin slips into that favorite spot. Oh, man. Benjamin, who's his mom? Rachel, who was his favorite. Who's up? Pauline. Are you ready? Good. Would you read verses 8 through 17?
Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see our land. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." "No, my lord," they answered. "Your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." "No," he said to them. "You have come to see where our land is unprotected." But they replied, "Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more." Joseph said to them, "It is just as I told you, you are spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother. The rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you are telling the truth. If you are not, then surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." And he put them all under custody for 3 days.
You'll say one thing for them, they're not tight-lipped. They just keep talking and talking and talking. Not one of them said, "Hey, Reuben, throw out the shovel." Just clam it up, will you? Stop telling them our life history. But that's kind of the way some of us are, right? I mean, we we go in to get our car repaired, and the service guy comes out, and we not only tell him what we think is wrong with the car, but we tell him why we need it fixed, because we're going someplace, and it's so many miles, and we were planning on coming here and doing this. He doesn't want to know all that. Or we have someone come over to paint our house, and we can't just show them where we want it. We have to tell them what it used to be like, and then why we painted it this color, and now why we want to change the color. We just talk. I don't have that problem, but yeah, I do. So Joseph really is interested in what? Yes. He wants to know where the youngest one is. What's happened to him? Well, he's with our father. And then all of a sudden the wheels start turning and Joseph is saying, things haven't changed. It's terrible. You guys, why do you call yourselves honest? You're not honest. You're dishonest. Man, you've been lying for years. So, I tell you what. If what you say is true, then I'm just going to hold you here until the little one comes over. So somebody, it's not going to be you 10. You're staying here. Send a servant back and say, we got to bring Ben back. And so right away he puts them all together. Now this is not solitary confinement. He puts them together, all 10. Oh, man. And I'll bet you that he has them in a spot where he can, in those 3 days, kind of just peer where they can't see him to watch the show. Because it's coming. Amy, would you read verses 18 through 25?
Now Joseph said to them on the third day, do this and live, for I fear God. You are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined in your prison. But as for the rest of you, go carry grain for the famine of your households, and bring your youngest brother to me. So your words may be verified, and you will not die. And they did so. Then they said to one another, truly we are guilty concerning our brother, because we saw the distress of his soul when he pleaded with us, yet we would not listen. Therefore this distress has come upon us. Reuben answered them, saying, did I not tell you, do not sin against the boy, and you would not listen? Now comes the reckoning for his blood. They did not know, however, that Joseph understood, for there was an interpreter between them. He turned away from them and wept. But when he returned to them and spoke to them, he took Simon from them and bound him before their eyes. Then Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain and to restore every man's money in his sack and to give them provisions for the journey. And thus it was done for them.
Okay. Joseph, clean shaven, got a nice haircut, decked out in all Egyptian gear, and it's the latest and the greatest because he's rich. And what a nice touch. He has an interpreter standing beside him. And so while they're talking, the interpreter is telling them what they said, and he knows what they said. Those 3 days must have been miserable because they didn't know what was going to happen. They know their dad. Just kill us now. He is not letting Ben come here. If we don't return, he's going to cut his losses. And we're just toast. I mean, that's what you're thinking because you know your dad. So he changes the game. Because first he said he's going to keep, how many? 10. He's going to keep all 10. Now he says he's going to keep how many? I'm going to keep one. You take your servants and your sacks of grain and all of this so your family can be fed and get out of here. And don't come back without Ben, or this one is dead. And then he hears something that he didn't know before. Verse 22. What does he hear that he didn't know before?
I told you.
That Reuben came to his defense?
That Reuben wasn't in on it. Yes. Because remember, Reuben goes away, and while he's gone, they sell him. And he said, I told you, don't do that. And then in verse 21, we don't get this information early. We don't hear it until chapter 42, verse 21. They're talking amongst themselves. And what do they say about that day?
We are guilty.
What was Joseph doing on that day? He was begging for his life down in that hole. And all we knew earlier from the chapters is they sat around eating lunch while he's crying to be saved. Wow. Doesn't it just make your heart, how compassionate those boys were? I mean, to tell you. So they don't know Joseph understands. And so why do you think verse 24 happens? What's going on? Why do you think he does this?
He still loves his brothers.
He still loves them. Yeah. And to know that they're carrying this guilt and they're still so tore up about it, that affects him because he's not like them. He's a good boy. And to hear them going through this, it just breaks his heart. So, Reuben's the oldest. Why tie up Simeon? He was the ringleader. Bingo. So he's got some compassion, but he's still got a memory. And he keeps the one that was responsible. And what an added touch. What does it say he did in verse 24?
He had Simeon bound before their eyes.
Yeah. Right there in front of him. Slaps the cuffs on him and hauls him back to prison. Right in front of their eyes. That's it. We're done.